Hi everyone, welcome to my review of the Coen Brothers' No Country for Old Men in 2007. Here is the Blu-ray, and yes, we are here, another Coen Brothers review of course. Haven't done these in a while now. I can't remember exactly what the last one I done was, possibly Miller's Crossing, something like that, maybe, possibly Miller's Crossing, or Raising Arizona, but yes. The Coen Brothers of course, I love them, and also there's a couple that I don't like too much of them. Miller's Crossing is the one I really do not like, but again, just my opinion. This one, of course, is known to be one of their very best, if not their best. It's kind of up there on the rankings, with Fargo, Big Lebowski, stuff like this. And yes, this film, of course, was the first Coen Brothers that I saw. I saw this back really just after it came out. Once it came on DVD, I had this, and I saw it for the first time. And I was blown away. I really was. No beating around the bush here. This film, I'd heard so much great things about it. Of course, it's a western, although some don't refer to it as a western. I do. And it is kind of, yes, it is set in 1980, but it is basically a western. But also a thriller, and so much more. It's a cat and mouse film at times, and it's kind of a contemplation just on life. A very spiritual film, and yes. The Coen Brothers, of course, won Best Director, and it was obviously up against another film which really gets compared to this quite a bit. We'll get that out of the way. There'll Be Blood, of course, PTA. Some say it's his masterpiece. I don't agree with that, but I do think it's a masterpiece. What do I think's better? There'll Be Blood. Hands down for me, is a better film, but this one, like There Will Be Blood, for me, is one of the best films ever made. I was blown away the first time I saw this, of course. Very risky, and of course, if you've seen my channel, you know I love music and films. This doesn't really have any in it. It's not typical, not a typical film at all. Very, very different film. Very risky film, and it's a very, very different take on westerns and thrillers, really, full stop. But yes, this film just completely blew me away. I've seen it many, many times now, at least 15, I would say, close to 20. It's just a film that I've seen so many times. Whenever it's just about to start, I would watch it. And of course, on Blu-ray, of course, it's truly wonderful. The cinematography, Roger Deakins worked with the Coens on this. Hands down, their best cinematography that I've seen. And yes, of course, before, I think it was Raising Arizona. I saw that for the first time last year, and I said it's the one that could be my Coen Brothers, my pick for the best Coen Brothers film. There was another I said that it's only really beaten by that, if at all. But I think No Country for Old Men is the film that I was on about, of course. And yes, after I watched Raising Arizona, I thought it's the only one that comes close, and I was considering whether I did prefer it to this. But then after maybe a week, I said, no, it's still No Country for Old Men. This is my favourite currently from the Coen Brothers. It's just an absolute masterpiece of cinema. It truly is deserving of its awards. Very, very acclaimed film, of course. It's an acclaimed film across the board. And yes, basically, Llewellyn Moss is a character who he basically is out hunting, and he gets caught up in this. Well, he stumbles across the aftermath of a drug deal, he suspects, and of course, there's money in a briefcase. It's very, very classic, inspired here, and that's one of the setups of the film. Before this, we were greeted with kind of narration. It's just showing the scenery and stuff, and talking about, of course, the old timers. This is a very, very interesting film. What the Coens are doing here. Maybe it takes a couple of watches to actually pick up on what it is, because of course, at surface level, it is a very, very intense cat and mouse film, thriller, and of course, a western of sorts. But this is very, very deep and complex. This film, it's a character study, of course, for psychopath, and of course, other characters you could say it's kind of split character studies, but it's very, very different. It is very, very it involves itself, of course, with the West. The old timers is referred to a lot throughout the film. Tommy Lee Jones, of course, plays the sheriff in the film. He's narrating at first, and he's basically saying he admires the old timers. He always compares himself to the way that things were dealt with back then. So it's really, really interesting. It's a massive theme. Kind of comparisons, of course, throughout the film of between modern era and of course kind of many, many years ago in the West. It's very, very interesting what they're saying here. Of course, it is a different take, on the Western genre. I certainly consider it a Western, of course, just a neo-Western. It's very, very different. But yes, of course, throughout the film, you see these comparisons. Of course, it's getting, the differences in crime, just general attitudes, and just the way, of course, law, is dealt with. Some things don't change, but there is comparisons, of course, and saying things have changed. Now crimes are very, very different at times, and you've got people like Anton Chigurh, who is the of course the villain in the film, who is just something that they never really saw many years ago, and they didn't really hear of anyone like this. Of course, Javier Bardem got the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, and it really was deserving. For me, this is one of the best villains of all time. Certainly, actually one of the best performances of all time. Full stop. This is something else. It's a scary film because of him. It really is. He's a character, of course, who kind of he interrupts this kind of the kind of narration at the beginning. He just kind of walks on the screen with the handcuffs. You don't see his full face at first, and you just know that something's wrong there. He interrupts this kind of tranquil, you could say, contemplation that we were greeted to at the beginning. He walks on, and then he just brutally kills a police officer who has just taken him into custody. And the way that scene plays out is it is insane. I was shocked. From then on, when watching this film, the heartbeat never stops. You could say it's intense throughout. After this, it really is. It's what an opening to a villain. Really is. Just really something else. And of course, he plays into that comparison. Tommy Lee Jones' character is making. This is one psychopath. It really is. It's someone who is just one of the best villains of all time. One of the scariest characters in cinema. What a performance! There's not a single moment that I think of him just as an actor. It's just really insane what is going on here. It really is a perfect portrayal of a psycho. It really is. It's insane. But again, the calmness of his actions, it seems, is what's really, really scary. Just the way he walks with his socks on, up the kind of very, the scene in the first half of the film, the bit where he's drinking milk, just all the kind of mannerisms, that he's completely scary and insane, but, there's something about him where, it seems very, very calm when he's doing this, when he's killing people. It never phases him, and he doesn't seem to care whatsoever when he's picking people off. You never really fully know about his character, really deep down what he actually is trying to do, if anything, and that's a good thing. There is a mystery to him, maintained throughout the film. Even once the kind of the last scene he's in, you still never know what the hell you just saw, really, in that sense, and that is the great thing. One of the many great things about his character and this film. It's a very mysterious film, wonderful atmosphere. Of course, it's portrayed through the visuals, the script, and just the overall kind of the lack of music. Now, I really, one of the things that it's maybe a checklist for me, considering my favourite films or films that I love, the use of music and actually the music itself, how it relates to the characters, the story, the time period perhaps, and of course, just many moments, that kind of maybe uplift or sad moments. But this film, it has some sound design, which some say is music in itself. I don't, in that sense. That's all it has, really. There's no score to this film, really, at all. It's very, very minimalist in its sound design, even. It's just, certain moments in the film. And it really is something that I just thought, beforehand, because I'd heard about this, of course, I thought, very risky once again. This is a very risky film, but I thought at the end of it, they made that work. And a lot of the time that doesn't work too well for me. It can make a film flat and stuff, but this film perfected that. The Coen brothers knew what they were doing, and for me, this is just the best Coen brothers film. They just were in control of every single part of the film. The tone of the film is never broken at all. It's very different, of course. This doesn't really feel like a Coen brothers film, other than just maybe at times the way it's shot, but again, not so much. But really, just even the comedy is very, very different. It has got some flourishes here and there, kind of Coen brothers comedy. Maybe you can compare it to Inside Llewyn Davis. It's more dry, more subtle humour. But again, nothing like the ones before this. Then you could say, in terms of the Coen brothers, very very different. It's not parodying anything really at all. It's very very different. It's not the same sort of energy that they would have in a lot of their films, and you can compare it to Miller's Crossing, but I wouldn't, because I don't like that film at all, and I think that's very very different. But yes, this film really is just a masterpiece in every sense. These characters, of course, Kelly Macdonald as well, brilliant in the film, wonderful actress. Javier Bardem, of course, one of the greatest villains of all time in this film, and the way it escalates. You see, of course, very early on, it's very very tranquil. When he's hunting Josh Brolin, who is amazing in the film, probably his best performance for me. And of course, when he played Thanos, in Avengers, absolutely stunning. But this film for me is probably his best performance that I've seen. He's just something else, it really is. And of course, he's basically early on when he's hunting. It's very very peaceful. It's very very kind of just tranquil and stuff. And then of course the film escalates gradually, and this tension is never broken. Until maybe the final sort of 5 minutes of the film. But of course, most of the film is a cat and mouse. There'll be no spoilers here, of course. You have to see the film if you want to know what happens, of course. And do I recommend it? Yes, of course. I don't think much people would dislike this film. Really, I don't. I've never met anyone who doesn't say that the coin toss scene is a great scene. I think that's a key scene. It's very very early on. It's one of the greatest scenes in cinema, full stop. For sure, one of the best of the century. That scene, I could do an analysis of that scene. It's just it's how you build tension. It's how you balance that with comedy. How you get nervous laughter. Really is. That's when I first saw that. I didn't know what to think. All I knew was that was one of the best scenes I've ever seen. It was just something else. It's just a very very contained scene. Doesn't really relate to the rest of the narrative too much, but it just says a lot, of course, about the character of Javier Bardem is playing, Vanton Chigurh. It really is something else. Of course, the comedy, as I've said, just the way that the camera lingers, the kind of reaction shots, the way it lingers, though, of course, on the rapper. That's just genius filmmaking, and that can really just sum up his character. Of course, it has the comedy in there, it has the tension, it has the performances, of course. It just really. That is kind of the film in a nutshell. It's just this balance of very, very, kind of dry humour at times, kind of very, very subtle, but this tension, this really disturbing stuff that is evident throughout the rest of the film. Of course, there is great action in this film. It just really is edge of your seat, thriller, of course. But again, I love what it says about the Western genre, and about kind of the way things change over time. I love Tommy Lee Jones's character, the sheriff, of course, that he plays. Really amazing. I love the scenes when him and his partner are going out, kind of scouting the scenes, investigating. So involving, really is, and it's very, very kind of peaceful and very, very human stuff there. I loved it. Really is. He's a character that it's just so kind of, he's so compelling. Of course, when you've got the villain like Anton Chigurh, and you've got all this stuff going on, many people probably wouldn't pay attention too much to this sheriff, but he really, in many ways, is just as compelling. He really is just an amazing character. I love the kind of his outlook and stuff, and just the way he is kind of disturbed, and he's kind of got his own demons. He's got his own secrets. And they, of course, they're never really fully revealed, but the final scene to this film, it's just truly, truly wonderful. Many people have said they don't really like the ending, or don't get the ending. I think when I first saw it, I thought that was a great scene, great dialogue and stuff, and very, very nice, very touching. But I thought maybe it's an interesting way to end it. I didn't think it was a flaw, but now I think, after all these times of seeing it, I really understand why it had to end that way, and just wonderful, wonderful stuff. All the parallels really come to a close, through that scene, and kind of this film hasn't really got many statements, direct statements, but it does say a lot about the Western genre and just life in general. It's very, very moving, actually, in many subtle ways, and yes, this film, the cinematography, of course, the way that landscape shots are captured are truly wonderful. This is something else. This is how you shoot a film. The lighting is all staggering. Really creates a time period, of course, as well. The kind of the costumes, everything. This film is wonderful to look at. The sound design, minimalist, is perfect in building tension and kind of the atmosphere. Of course, it does also relate to the actual character of Anton Chigurh. The way that it's kind of his cold character. He's just this cold atmosphere running throughout scenes when he's in. Of course, and that's why there's kind of lack of music, in many regards. Yes, so this film, what it says about, kind of humanity, it's really, really scary at times, but again, it's very, very hopeful and very, very touching stuff. Of course, the way the film ends is ambiguous, but I think I do love the way the film ends, and it kind of, as I say, wraps everything up perfectly. It's very, very, very touching at the end. It's just wonderful. This film, if you've not seen it, prepare to be hopefully blown away. I think, yes, not the best film of the year for me personally. It's not to say this is not a masterpiece, because it easily is for me. Just There Will Be Blood is for me an even greater one. On a higher level, because it's PTA and not even his best film, but his films, is kind of even his top 5, his 8 he's made, are something that is very hard to compete with. So yes, this film, of course, is a masterpiece, and it is just one of my top 200 films of all time. So yes, of course, this film, I absolutely love everything about the film. It really is cinematic perfection in my opinion. There is not a single flaw for me personally. Some, will say the ending is not, for them, which is fine, but for me, it's a wonderful way to end the film, and I think actually it ended perfectly there. Very contemplative, and yes, this film, it feels epic, even though it is more of a kind of cat and mouse thriller. It's very hard, maybe for a thriller to kind of feel like this epic film. It's very, very interesting to kind of combine Western and thriller at times, and this one kind of, it doesn't feel odd, it doesn't feel jarring at all. It's perfectly meshed, these genres and stuff, and how they deconstruct the Western genre. Although, of course, it's 1980, but for me it is definitely a Western of sorts, and it's just wonderful. Of course, the action scenes are just so good in this film. The shootouts, so intense. I was just on the edge of my seat throughout. I've seen it, about 20 times now, and it just gets better and better. This film is a marvel to behold. It's full of great supporting cast. Woody Harrelson, great character here as well. Josh Brolin, of course, wonderful protagonist, very relatable. But again, he's got flaws that are definitely revealed to us. They're all put on the table, and it's just, he's a character that he's in search of money. At times, he shows greed, and of course, Javier Bardem's character of Anton Chigurh does not really care for these things. And it's a very, very interesting kind of dual character study, although they don't really, kind of meet in that sense, together, of course, throughout the film. So it's very, very interesting, and it's a thriller from start to finish. But it's also a Western, and it's just a wonderful, contemplative, spiritual piece for me. I think it's just a wonderful film. And yes, for me, of course, it gets full marks, and actually, it does get into my plus tiers, and yes, it's very, very close, on the line, you could say, between, the tier 3 and the tier 2s, and actually, it's always been very close since I adjusted my rating scale. It's been sitting, I've had to of course, rewatch it. I've not seen it for a couple of years now, and see exactly where it is, to do I prefer to this? Do I, not quite as much of this film? And it's just always very hard for this, to I have to get it right, I feel, with this, and yes, since I adjusted them, of course, the rating, has kind of moved back a bit, so, some other films are maybe allowed in, you could say, and this one does get into the tier 2 rating, so yes, this film is one of the best films ever made. It's definitely in my top 200. This is an absolute masterpiece of cinema. I cannot believe how good this is. It's perfection. The way it's kind of just a masterful thriller. A genius take on the Western genre. It's so relatable, all these characters, and just all these details, and it's so warm. Even though it's the villain, of course, is so cold. He's one of the most psycho characters in film. And of course, it's very, very dark and disturbing and gritty, and kind of very, very harsh, of course. It portrays the harshness of the West, and the kind of business of the drug trade and everything like this. Yes, it portrays loneliness as well, but it is very, very warm. Of course, characters like, the sheriff portray that perfectly, and it's a wonderful film from start to finish, and yes, an absolute masterpiece of the craft. Once again, by the Coen brothers. They are just great, great directors, of course. For me, this is their best film. Yes, I do prefer it to Raising Arizona, although that's the film that I like to say is my second favourite, kind of thing. I think I do prefer that to Fargo, probably. Very, very close, but yes, this film is my favourite, and yes, of course, one of my absolute favourite films of all time. Not in my top 100, but in my top 200. This is just mind-blowing in every sense, and just a wonderful film for me. Perfection. So yes, tell me what you think in the comments, and of course, yes, more reviews coming. Coen Brothers as well. Eventually, I'll get around to them. Inside Llewyn Davis. Got to give that a rewatch. Only seen it once. One of the ones that I love, though, of course. So yes, thanks for watching my review.